Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Hugh from Loxone and this is part of an ongoing video series looking at really focused topics of Loxone. So what we have today to show you is a very common use case, very common scenario in both residential, commercial and hospitality sectors, and that is key management. So what we have in most houses, in most buildings, is traditional locks with keys, etc. So what I wanted to do is try and explain why we should be considering something like electronic access for our building, the benefits of electronic access, and then finally how we can actually achieve that through Loxone. So I've also got a demo case over here, which I can change my camera to as we go along. And I've also pre-added a little device in there as well to use with this. So first of all, why should we consider electronic access? Why should we look at moving away from traditional key management? Well, the first and most obvious reason is the ability to simply provision and delete fobs. It makes it very easy to add a fob for somebody. If they lose that fob, to delete it, to give them access to somewhere new if they need it, all from the comfort of an app or a piece of software. We can also manage the times and areas that someone's allowed to access. So as a classic example, in a commercial building, if somebody is promoted, they may get access to a new area of the building that they didn't previously have. And through an electronic access system, it is very simple to give them that access. We can also reduce lifetime costs. How many times has one of our loved ones or one of our children lost the keys to our house? And then we worry about that key being out in the loose, out in the wild. Yes, we can get a new key cut for them to replace it with, but we're always a little bit worried. We could pay to replace the lock cylinder, but that costs money. These are all things that have to be considered with traditional keys. And in commercial buildings, that's exasperated even further. Imagine in a hotel with traditional keys or in a guest room. If those keys go missing, that's potentially the room out of action for a night or two while you get a locksmith round, unless you pay for an emergency locksmith, which is going to be a higher cost. In large commercial buildings, this could be devastating because these could be suited keys, especially in things like campuses and university buildings where you have a facilities management team who has a master key into every riser across the campus. If one of those suited keys goes missing, they have to replace every single lock. And suited key cylinders are not cheap. That could be thousands of pounds worth of locksmith work, plus the effort to get everyone's keys back off them and then to give them all a new set of keys. So what we can do by bringing in electronic management, electronic access, is we can simplify all of this and we can reduce the overall lifetime cost of things going wrong by keys getting lost, etc. So how do we achieve it? Well, in Loxone, the best way to achieve it is with an NFC code touch, as you'll see there in that picture. The NFC code touch can be in white or anthracite, tree or air. And so that's what we're going to look at. We are going to look at a config example using the NFC code touch. And what we're going to look at in particular is an Airbnb. So typical Airbnb, if you think of them normally, what you'll quite often see is there will be a little key safe on the outside of the house that has the keys to the house in, and the owner of the Airbnb, they'll text you before you go and stay, tell you the code to get into the key safe. You get the keys, you happily use the house, you leave, you put the keys back, etc. That code probably never changes. They probably don't go out and change that code regularly, which means that there's always the risk that somebody could come back, take those keys, get themselves into the house, take whatever they want. Plus, it puts a lot of emphasis on the owner of the property to regularly check that key safe to make sure that the keys are still there. Imagine if they had new guests staying and they sent them the code to the key safe, they got into the key safe and there were no keys there. It could be potentially harmful to their business. So what we can do with electronic access is we can say that the owner of the property, they obviously have 24-hour access. They can get in and out as and when they need. But what they can also have is 2, 3, 4, however many fobs they want, which is for guest access. Now, to simplify this, what they could do is those guest fobs could have unlimited access, 24 hours a day, 7 days a year, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They never stop working. And what the owner of the property could do is they could set it up that they have those fobs waiting on the kitchen counter for whoever's staying. And then what they could do is they could issue a short-term code to that person, which will allow them in through the front door. But that code is only valid for a week or however long someone's staying. So they can get themselves in through the front door, pick up the fobs, to then obviously take the fobs with them and use the fobs as access, leave the fobs behind when they go, and then be on their merry way. It works as well. If we're in the scenario where somebody takes the fobs away with them, then it's not the end of the world, because the next guest staying, they can just use the code to get through the door. And as soon as the owner of the property knows that those fobs are missing, it means that they can delete them easily and simply from the system without worrying about having to change locks. So now we've gone over with what we can do with access control and why it's important, why we should consider it. Let's start looking at configuring it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to switch my camera over so that instead of seeing me, you're seeing my demo case here. And as you can see in my demo case, I've already pre-added an NFC code touch that I can use to demonstrate things for you. I'm then on my screen just going to move over to Loxone config. So what we can do with Loxone config is we essentially want to start off with this scenario. We want to have a landlord that has 24-hour access. So the first thing we need to do is we need to add in our NFC code touch. And that is as simple as dragging it from the periphery list out onto the page. It will then open up this box. And in this box, you can dictate the outputs. So the NFC code touch has up to 6 programmable outputs. I'm going to use output 2 later in this video, so you'll get to understand one of the many ways in which you can use the multiple outputs. You can say which user groups have access through this NFC code touch. Is it everyone? Is it only administrators? Is it only users? Or is it particular groups? And within each of these groups, you can also assign a schedule to them. You can also assign a code for the door itself, for the NFC itself. So rather than having a code assigned to a user, you could have one assigned just to this one NFC code touch here with different validity options. And you can also do the same for NFC tags. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we are actually going to need to put an output on there, because the NFC code touch in the app will just display as not correctly configured until there is at least one output on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab a relay for the front door, for the door lock, and stick that on Q1. That will then enable my NFC code touch to work. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create myself a user for the landlord or for the owner of the property. So that's our owner there. We also need to give that owner a user group. Now, we probably don't want to make him an administrator because that's obviously reserved for us as the partner, but I could give him a user group all of his own, again called owner, and I could dictate what access he has. He can use the app, can't use config, he can do operating times, he can do autopilot designer, interface settings, user management, and he can probably update his mini server. I then assign that user to that group. Once I've done that, in the NFC code touch, under user groups, I now have that user group available. So I can now say that actually, no, not everyone can use this door. Administrators, yeah, they probably can. Users, they probably can't. And the owner group, they definitely can. And I can also say during when, 24 hours a day. Excellent. The next thing I would need to do is I would need to actually learn a fob or a tag into that user. So there are 2 ways of doing this. The first way is through Loxone config, you can select the user, and over here on authentication, you can select this, select NFC tags, press learn, and it opens up the NFC monitor. And from here, you can choose learn. You can present a tag to the door and it will pop up here and you can learn it in. That's the first way. The second way is actually, in many respects, much, much simpler and is a new addition to the latest version of Loxone config. and that is that we can actually assign fobs to users through the app itself or through the user interface itself. And to do that, a user just needs permission to make user management changes. And then what they can do is they can go into the web interface or into the app. They can log themselves in. So I'm going to log in as admin because I haven't assigned a password to the owner yet. And from here, you can go to the magnifying glass, user management. You need to put your password in again, and that brings you to the user management screen here. Now you can give permissions so that somebody can only edit their own access, or if somebody is a user manager, they can edit any group within which they have rights to. So we can see the owner here. We can go into the owner. We could give them a user ID, change their group membership, or down here, we could pair in an NFC tag. So if we pair that in now, again, we need to put in the password. Oh, sorry, the user interface password. And once we've done that, the NFC code touch, if you can just about see here, starts scrolling a flashing blue light along. That's telling us it is in pair mode. We then grab ourselves a tag, present the tag, it flashes green, and up on my screen, it now says paired successfully, give the tag a name. So I'm going to call this his key fob. And that is now done. So this user now has a fob assigned to them. And if I just stop my screen share for a second so that you can see my demo case in full screen, I now take my fob, present it, goes green, and that output activates. Brilliant. Back to showing my screen again. So that is now our user, our owner with 24-hour permission. The next thing he wants is, or she wants, is to have the ability to have 2 fobs that get left on the kitchen counter for anyone that may use the property. Now, there are 2 ways of doing this. The first way is in the NFC code touch itself, under NFC tags, they could actually learn them directly in here. So they could actually learn a tag directly into the block itself, and then it will only be valid for this one NFC code touch. The second way is to do it on a user level, so to have them on a user base level. Now, as we said, we want these fobs to have 24-hour access. We probably want to do it on the user level. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create 2 users. One of them is going to be guest 1. One of them is going to be guest 2. And then secondly, I again probably want a user group for the guests. And then those users, yeah, they could probably have the web interface, the app, because I'm probably going to leave a tablet there for them, but I probably don't want to give them any other kind of access. And then I add those users to that group. And then in here, under user groups, I make sure that the guests have access. Then once that's done, I simply learn in the tags for them as well. So just to quickly cover that, I've got 2 spare fobs here. Just give this a second to reboot. So again, magnifying glass, user management, put in the password. There's guest 1, there's guest 2. So guest 1, pair NFC tag, user interface password, present the tag, paired successfully, give it a name, done. Guest 2, exactly the same, pair NFC tag, present the tag, give it a name, done. So that would be the 2 guest tags created and ready to use. And again, just to show you, green light, access granted. The next thing we want to do is we said that we wanted that they had a code that we could issue them that was only valid for the time that they're staying, so that they can get in through the front door and then pick these tags up from the kitchen counter or the dining room table. The best way to do that is if you go into the NFC Code Touch block itself within the app, you have the option to add an access code. So if you click on Add Access Code, you can give the access code a description. So we could call this John and Jane, because those are the guests that we have staying. We could give them a code, nice and secure, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we could say when this is valid for. So we could say that this is timed access, and they are staying with us between the 24th of March at, let's say 3:17, until they are staying with us until, let's say, the 27th of March, and they're leaving no later than 11 a.m. There we go. So there is our from and our until. We can then say what they're allowed to do. So their permissions currently is just door lock. Yep, that's fine. Tick that. And now John and Jane, if I again just stop my screen share. 1, 2, 3, 4, tick. Unlocks the door. They have access. They can pick up their fobs, leave to their heart's content, and when they come back, they can now just simply use the fob instead to gain access. And as soon as their staying period ends, their code will no longer work. Now, the next scenario that could come up is next guests arrive, they go in, they ring me up, and they say, really, really sorry, but there was only a single fob there. One of the fobs is missing. So what I'd probably have to do is I'd probably have to delete one or both of the fobs. And again, if a user has user management selected, they can go into that particular user that I said we assigned the fob to. And down here, you can see the NFC tag that they currently already have, and we have the option to delete it. So we can get rid of that tag, and we can pair a new one in for them. So now, once I've done that, sorry, just share my screen again. I realized I wasn't sharing. So as I said, we need to delete one of the tags. So we'd do the magnifying glass, user management, find the particular guest that we wanted to delete the tag from, which in this case would be guest 2. You can see the tag there. We can go into it and we can delete the tag. Yes, delete. And now what will happen is that tag simply will not work. Red light, access denied. And so that, in a nutshell, is how we could do door access in something like an Airbnb, simply and effectively with Loxone. Now, of course, just to finish this off, to give a few more ideas of what we could do, we could expand this to be more than just door access. So if we were to bring in more than just door access, we could bring in something like heating as well. So through a block like the Intelligent Room Controller, which is our heating and cooling control block, we could do some rather clever things. So as I said, on this block, you have the availability of multiple outputs. So what if we made output 2 guest is staying? And then what if we then had a switch block on the app that only the owner of the property could see? And this switch block was whether the property was in, what should we call it, sleep mode. And what we could do is, if you take a look at something like the Intelligent Room Controller, you have a schedule. And one of those schedule periods is away. And when the house is in the away mode, then the heating actually goes to frost protection. So instead of going on normally or even the economy setback, it's just purely making sure that the house doesn't freeze. And so what we could have on this switch block is we could have it so that that operating mode of away is tied to this switch block and is on by default with that negation there, that inversion. And then what we could say is that when output 2 goes off, or even, we could even say that when any granted access is given, we actually reset this block. So we could have allowed access, resets this sleep mode switch block, which will turn away mode off, which will put the house into comfort heating. And to show that in practice, if I save that in, and then when it's saved in, I go to live view. You can see now, at the moment, we're in the away operating mode. Back to our user interface. I can see, I can't see that switch block. The reason I can't see that switch block is because I'm logged in as an admin who is under the user group administrator. It's only the owner that can see that switch block. But you can see at the moment that the heating and cooling is currently off. It's in the frost protection mode because it's currently in the away operating mode. If somebody is now granted access through the door, what happens on live view? Sorry, that is my mistake there. What would happen in live view is that away switch would come off because I would have reset it, but I actually need to do my inversion on another way around. The heating would then come on and we'd be in comfort mode. And using those kind of scenarios, we can then take what is already a quite sophisticated and useful access control system that can be used for residential, commercial, letting properties, hospitality, etc., 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 and we can bring it into a much wider range of opportunities for control. So we control heating systems, we can control lighting systems, all based on whether somebody is staying within that property or not, and whether they've actually been granted access through that door. Wonderful. I hope you've enjoyed this session. Please join me again for the next one. Other than that, goodbye, and thank you very much for watching.